Tonight, we are diving into a garden touched only by moonlight. Let your breath grow quiet. Let your shoulders relax. You're safe now, listening to a story where time moves slowly and everything feels soft and distant. Our story tonight begins in the hush of early dusk, in a forest where the branches lean in close like old friends whispering secrets. There, nestled between two moss-covered hills, stands a stone cottage, nearly forgotten by time. Its roof is heavy with thatch, its walls made of sun-warmed granite, and its chimney breathes soft curls of fragrant smoke into the velvet blue sky. Inside the cottage lives the alchemist. His name is Alderwin, and while many in the nearby village believe he's little more than a potion mumbler or stargazer, Alderwin is something more. He is a keeper of forgotten things, a listener of wind and stars, and a friend to the soft, quiet magic the world sometimes forgets. The fire crackles softly behind him as he leans over a worn oak table. A quill feather rests beside a half-full jar of ink thick and black, glimmering faintly like night sky in a bottle. Beside it, a small cloth pouch tied in twine, and from it, he gently pulls a single owl feather, long, pale, speckled, and dusky silver. He holds it up to the firelight, and it shimmers. You see, in medieval alchemy, feathers weren't just symbols of air and flight. Some believed certain feathers, gathered at the right time under the right moon, could carry dreams. Not dreams of gold or riches, but dreams of memory and sleep. And so tonight, Alderwin prepares his most delicate of drafts, a sleep elixir, for a child who cannot rest, and he needs the feather of a moon-born owl. He hums softly as he works, a lullaby long forgotten in a language not spoken but felt. The cottage is dim now, lit only by the gentle flicker of candlelight. The shelves above him are filled with tiny glass bottles, corked tight, each one labeled in Alderwin's elegant looping hand: mugwort, hellebore, milk thistle, frost lily. There's something tender about the way he moves slow, precise, never rushed. Each motion a rhythm, a pattern, a ritual of quiet purpose. He takes a small silver spoon and dips it into a jar of powdered chamomile, so fine it floats like dust. Then, with a mortar carved from river stone, he grinds it with dried lavender and a few brittle petals from a poppy flower, red as ember glow. Outside, the wind stirs the trees. Leaves murmur like lullabies. An owl calls soft, distant, echoing into the night. Alderwin smiles. He has always believed that certain sounds, especially the soft ones of night, have the power to settle the soul. And that belief is folded into every potion he brews. He picks up the owl feather now with reverence. Not to stir the potion, no, but to whisper over it. He closes his eyes and speaks to the feather, not with words of command, but gratitude. For this feather, gathered from the mossy floor beneath the old watch tree, comes from a bird who once flew above the castle towers of Elderglen, a place where the stars seem to fall closer to earth, where kings once dreamt not of conquest, but of peace. Alderwin had been there once, long ago, when he was young, when his beard was still dark, and the sky still felt like it could speak. But that is a memory wrapped in time, and tonight is for sleep. He dips the feather's tip into the potion now, just once, then draws a single spiral in the air above the mixture. The surface ripples gently, like a breath. The light from the hearth flickers across the liquid, and something changes. It's subtle, but real. If you were there, you might feel your own breath slow, your shoulders soften, your heart rest. Because this potion, you see, is not made to force sleep, but to invite it, to coax it, like a friend waiting at the edge of a quiet forest path. Alderwin pours the draft into a glass vial, corks it, wraps it in a linen cloth, and places it into a carved wooden box lined with dry moss and lavender sprigs. Tomorrow, he'll bring it to the child's family, but tonight, he prepares for sleep himself. He moves toward the hearth and stirs the coals. The fire sighs. The room glows with soft amber. He takes a seat in his favorite chair carved by his father's hands, its arms smoothed by decades of quiet use. And from the wall, he lifts down a book, its leather cover warm from the firelight. He opens it not to read, but to trace the lines of a familiar tale. It's the story of how stars were once believed to be holes in the heavens, little pinpricks through which celestial light slipped to fall like dew upon sleeping eyes. He smiles again, closes the book, and leans back, letting the hum of the fire and the hush of the night hold him. And somewhere, far above his cottage, the owl flies again. And now, let yourself float with Alderwin's breath. Feel the soft creak of the chair beneath him, the way the fire curls upward like a lullaby in smoke. Let your mind drift. Your limbs loosen. Your thoughts grow feather-light. There is no need to hold on to anything now. You are safe here, in the alchemist's warmth. In a world where sleep is a story, and every story ends with rest. Outside the alchemist's cottage, the forest breathes. If you listen closely, you can hear it. The hush of wind weaving between the trees, the gentle rustle of leaves as they turn in their sleep. Above, the sky has deepened to ink. A silver moon, round and slow, pours its light like water across the clearing. Stars blink gently overhead, as though taking long, drowsy blinks. Alderwin has closed his eyes. His chair creaks once beneath him, then grows still. But sleep does not come quickly to him, not because he resists it, but because his mind, like the winding roots beneath the forest floor, moves in slow spirals, full of memory. He remembers a time when the forest was younger, when he was an apprentice, when his own master, a wise woman named Breda, taught him how to listen to the land and not just harvest from it. Every plant, she once whispered, has a rhythm, and every person has a sleep that matches some part of that rhythm. Find it, and they will rest easy. Alderwin had not understood then, but now many seasons later, he finds himself reaching for that truth more often. His fingers, weathered and strong, trace the arms of his chair, where little carvings, stars, leaves, and waves have long faded into the grain. Each mark holds a story. He rises slowly, not rushed. There is no reason to hurry. In the quiet of the night, time doesn't pass, it stretches, like warm honey. He walks across the floor, which creaks gently underfoot. He lights another candle with a taper from the hearth, and its soft glow flickers in greeting. Tonight, though he's finished the sleep draft for the child, something still stirs in him. Not unease, no. Curiosity. A gentle tug, like the pull of the moon on water. Something. Unfinished. He steps to the back of the cottage, where a narrow wooden door waits. It groans faintly as he opens it, revealing a stairway that spirals downward into the roots of the hill. This is the cellar, cool, dry, and ancient. But Alderwin's cellar is no ordinary one. It holds not only barrels and herbs, but memories. The walls are lined with scrolls, maps, dried herbs hung upside down in bunches, and old clay jars whose contents are known only to him. The air smells of earth and parchment, sage and ashwood. He descends slowly, his candle casting soft shadows that seem to lean forward, curious to follow him. At the far end of the room, under a low arch of stone, rests a wooden chest. Its hinges are wrapped in ivy, though no light shines here. It is not locked, but it has not been opened in many years. Alderwin kneels before it, the way one might before an altar. He touches the lid, then lifts it with care. Inside is a bundle of soft cloth, wrapped in velvet so dark it swallows the light. He unfolds it, breath held, and reveals another feather, not pale like the owl's, but deep violet, threaded with midnight blue and silver tips. A feather from the starlight falcon, an almost mythical bird, once believed to appear only to those in deep sorrow or deep sleep. Breda had given it to him many years ago, and told him to use it only when sleep alone could heal a heart. He holds it now, cradled in both hands, and closes his eyes. The memory returns. A younger Alduin, no older than 20, running through this very forest under falling snow. In his arms, a child wrapped in wool, feverish and limp. He remembers the panic, the helplessness, the way Brita had taken the child, placed a single drop of lavender oil on the feather's spine, and whispered something Alduin never forgot. Let sleep carry the body where words cannot. The child had lived, but more than that, she had woken with a smile, peaceful, whole, as if she had been somewhere safe. That child, now grown, is the mother of the boy Alduin will visit tomorrow. The candle flickers. Alduin gently returns the feather to its cloth and folds it shut, placing it back in the chest. But before closing it fully, he adds something else, a tiny scrap of parchment, upon which he scribbles a single word, Sum. He stands brushing dust from his knees, and the air around him feels heavier, but not in a burdensome way. More like a woolen cloak settling on his shoulders. The weight of time, the warmth of purpose. He ascends the stairs once more and returns to the fire. The log has collapsed in on itself, glowing at the edges, whispering softly in its embers. He adds one more stick, no larger than his thumb, and watches as the flame gently reawakens. The room is warm now, nearly too warm. He pours himself a mug of Valyrian tea, sweetened with honey, and sits once more in his chair. Through the window, the moon hangs low above the treetops. An owl passes across it, wings spread wide. Perhaps the same one who gave the feather. He takes a sip of tea. The cup warms his hands. He breathes it in slowly, letting the steam fill his nose with soft, earthy calm. And then, from the shelf near the fire, he reaches for something unexpected, a small, palm-sized music box carved from yew wood. He turns the crank gently, just once. A single note chimes. Then another, and the melody unfolds like a memory reborn. It's a song from his childhood, a tune sung by traveling bards on feast days. Soft, lilting, easy. It drifts through the cottage like smoke, and for the first time in many nights, Alduin lets go. His eyes grow heavy, his hands still. The chair holds him like a cradle, and in the hush of his cottage, beneath the stars, sleep finally finds him. But elsewhere, the story stirs on. Several miles away, in the village of Thistledown, a young boy lies awake beneath heavy quilts. His name is Corwin. His eyes are wide, his thoughts restless. He listens to the ticking of the little brass clock on the mantel, to the distant bark of a dog beyond the hills, to the wind nudging the shutters. His mother sits beside him, fingers combing through his hair. She hums softly, a tune she doesn't even realize she knows. It's the same melody Alduin's music box played. She looks toward the door, as if expecting someone. And miles away, in the quiet dark, Alduin sleeps. But in his dream, he walks. He walks through a forest that glows with silver dew, beneath branches that part like curtains. The trees whisper not with leaves, but with memories. Faces flicker across bark. Laughing children, old friends, his master Brita. And in the distance, by a moonlit pool, a falcon waits. Not a real falcon, a spirit. A dream. Its feathers shimmer like the starlit sea. In its beak, it holds the violet feather. Alduin bows. Not from obedience, but from reverence. The falcon drops the feather into the pool, and ripples spread outward soft, slow, rhythmic. And in the boy's bedroom, far away, Corwin sighs once, then twice, and slips into sleep. His breathing evens out, his fingers unclench. The tension in his chest melts like ice on a summer stone. The potion has not yet arrived, but the story has. Because you see, sleep comes not only from draughts or potions or teas, but from the deep. Shared rhythms of stories, passed in whispers, carried on feathers, tucked into dreams. And in the heart of the forest, in a cottage warmed by candlelight and memory, the alchemist sleeps on. The morning light had not yet broken over the hills of Thistledown, but the sky was beginning to shift. The darkness that had held the land in velvet shadows was fading into soft gray, like the slow exhale of a dream. In Alderwin's cottage, the hearth was now a smoldering bed of coals, and the alchemist stirred from his chair, blinking slowly as the remnants of sleep clung to his limbs like cobwebs. He stretched quietly, mindful of the stillness around him. Though he had dozed in his chair many nights before, this sleep had been different, deeper, fuller, as though something, ancient and gentle, had watched over him through the night. He moved to the window, opening the wooden shutter with a quiet creak. Cool morning air touched his face. The forest beyond was silent save for the gentle song of a single thrush perched on a birch limb. Dew glistened on every leaf, turning the world to glass. Today would be the day he delivered the sleep draught to young Corwin. Alderwin washed his hands in the stone basin beside the hearth, the water drawn from the spring behind his cottage. He lit a single candle on the table and placed the linen-wrapped vial into a small wooden box, lined with moss and a ribbon of dry lavender. He tied the box closed with twine and tucked it carefully into a cloth satchel. There was no hurry. The walk to Thistledown would take him just past midday, through winding trails and memory-soaked woods. Before leaving, he opened a drawer beneath his herb shelf and pulled out a tiny wooden amulet carved into the shape of a crescent moon. It had belonged to Breda, his teacher. She had worn it always, believing the moon to be a watcher of dreams. Alderwin had not worn it in many years, but today, something in his bones told him it was time. With the amulet around his neck and his satchel over his shoulder, Alderwin stepped out into the forest path, the door to his cottage clicking shut behind him. The forest welcomed him. There was a rhythm in the soil, a heartbeat in the trees. Birds called gently. Leaves shifted overhead. The path, worn by years of walking, curved gently between oaks, and rowans, dipping now and again into shaded hollows, then rising into sunlit glades where wildflowers nodded in the breeze. As he walked, Alderwin let his thoughts wander. He remembered the first time he had ever made a sleep potion. He had been no more than 16, his hands trembling, his confidence fragile as spider silk. Breda had stood beside him, her presence calm and grounding. "It's not about power," she had said. "It's about presence. Be still, be kind, and the plants will give you what they can." That first potion had been for an elderly shepherd who could no longer rest through the night. Alderwin had delivered it himself, walking many miles in the dark. And he remembered the shepherd's eyes the next morning clear, grateful, rested. It had been the first time Alderwin understood that alchemy was not about transformation in the way most thought. It wasn't about turning lead to gold. It was about guiding nature toward kindness. His boots crunched softly on the gravel of the main road now. The village of Thistledown lay just beyond the next rise, nestled in a green valley beneath the old Watch Hill. As he crested the hill, he paused. Below him, the rooftops of Thistledown glowed in the morning light, thatch and timber, smoke curling lazily from chimneys. The bell atop the chapel tower had not yet rung. It was still early, a perfect time for a quiet visit. He descended the hill, waving gently to a baker who stood at his shop door, arms dusted in flour. The baker smiled but did not speak. Alderwin was known here, not worshipped, just quietly respected. A man who helped in small ways. At the edge of the village, he found Corwin's home. A simple stone cottage with ivy on the windowsill and a garden filled with mint and thyme. He knocked once, softly. The door opened, and there stood Mara, Corwin's mother, her eyes tired but kind. "Master Alderwin," she whispered. "Come in, please." He stepped into the cottage, ducking slightly beneath the wooden lintel. The air smelled of warm oats and dried herbs. Corwin lay on a low cot near the hearth, curled beneath a wool blanket. his brow creased in sleep. Mara knelt beside him, her hand on his back. Alderaan reached into his satchel and brought forth the linen-wrapped vial. "For him," he said quietly. "Only a single drop on his tongue, at twilight, and read to him, if you can. A soft tale. Let the story lead the way." Mara nodded, her eyes misting. "Thank you." Alderaan did not linger. His work here was done. But before he left, he stepped to Corwin's side, bent low, and whispered gently, not into the boy's ear, but into the space around him. A whisper of sleep, a memory of moonlight, a feather touch of dreams. He straightened, nodded once more, and stepped out into the sunlight. The walk home was slower, the sun now high, the sky a pale blue. Alderaan stopped once at the edge of the forest to pick a sprig of St. John's wort growing wild among the rocks. He tucked it behind his ear, smiling at the old superstition that had kept away night spirits. He didn't believe in such things, but he liked the idea that a flower could make someone feel safe. By the time he returned to his cottage, the shadows were beginning to stretch. He stowed his satchel, poured himself a cup of spring water, and lit a candle. The light glowed soft gold in the growing dusk. And then, with no urgency, he sat once more in his old carved chair by the hearth. He did not sleep this time. Instead, he opened a new page in his journal, took up his quill, and began to write. On the feather of the dreaming owl, he penned, and the child whose rest was guided not by draught alone, but by the softest stories whispered on the wings of dusk. The next morning brought a thin veil of mist that curled gently between the trees and hung low over the village rooftops. The forest floor was damp and rich with the scent of moss and new earth. Birds called in distant branches, their songs echoing softly through the quiet. Alderaan stirred before the sun rose fully, awakened not by urgency, but by an old habit learned from years of rising before light to gather herbs, watch the skies, and listen to the world while it was still dreaming. The hearth still held the faintest glow. His bones, though tired, felt rested. That deep kind of rest that doesn't come often. The kind that feels like being gently held by the earth itself. He moved slowly, as one does when there is no reason to hurry, lighting the kettle and adding a pinch of chamomile and elderflower to the clay teapot. As the water began to warm, the scent rose around him like an invisible fog floral, light, comforting. He opened the window above the sink and leaned out just slightly, letting the morning air touch his face. It smelled of wet bark and new beginnings. On the far branch of a yew tree, the owl was back. She looked at him, tilting her head ever so slightly, as if asking a question without words. He smiled at her. "You've been watching," he whispered. She blinked slowly in reply. The kettle let out a soft sigh, not quite a whistle, and Alderaan turned back inside. He poured the tea, wrapped his old shawl around his shoulders, and sat in his carved chair with the cup resting warm between his hands. He didn't think much that morning. He didn't need to. Some days are made for doing. Others are made for simply being. In Thistledown, Mara awoke to find Corwin still asleep. This was not unusual, but what was unusual was the expression on his face. His brow, often pinched in discomfort, was smooth. His lips, usually drawn into tight lines, were parted gently in a half smile. One hand rested on his chest, the other curled beside his cheek. She did not disturb him. She simply sat beside his bed and watched. When he did wake, much later that morning, he opened his eyes slowly, blinking up at her. "Did you dream?" she asked softly. Corwin nodded. "What of?" His voice was quiet, a little raspy with sleep. "A bird," he said, "and a forest, and stars that hummed." Mara blinked, surprised. "Were you scared?" He shook his head. "No, it felt like I was safe." She smiled and kissed his forehead. Later that day, she would write a short letter and send it by foot to Alderaan. Not a long message, just a few words. He slept. He dreamed. He smiled. That was all it said. But it was enough. Back in the cottage, Alduin received a letter just as the afternoon light began to turn golden. He read it, then folded it slowly, his fingers lingering over the soft parchment. He tucked it into the back of his journal, near the feather sketches and potion notes, then stood and walked toward his small apothecary shelf. There, between the jars of dried valerian root and blue gentian, was a little tin box. He hadn't opened it in years. Inside were odds and ends, a worn button, a pebble shaped like a heart, and a faded scrap of parchment with a note from Brita. When in doubt, stir with the moon. He didn't quite know what it had meant at the time, but now it made perfect sense. Some magic didn't come from heat or ingredients or incantations. Some came from timing, from rhythm, from listening. He reached into a drawer and pulled out another vial, the twin to the one he had given Corwin. He held it to the light. The liquid shimmered faintly, not from any glitter or potion trick, but simply from the way the herbs had mingled in the moonlight. A second child in the village had begun to struggle with sleep. Mara had mentioned it in passing weeks ago, a girl named Ellen, who often wandered at night, as if her dreams chased her from her bed. Alduin had already begun preparing for her, without even realizing it. He packaged the vial, added a sprig of mint, and placed it gently into his satchel. That evening, as the sun began to slip behind the hills and the birds called their final songs, Alduin walked once again into Thistledown. The village was winding down, shop shutters were closing. A blacksmith swept embers from his forge, and a small group of children chased fireflies between the cottages. Their laughter was soft and unhurried. Ellen's home sat beside the old well, near the edge of the market square. Her father greeted Alduin with a nod, his face worn but kind. Ellen peeked from behind his leg, her eyes wide and curious. Alduin knelt, held out his hand, and opened his palm. Resting in it was a feather small, simple, and soft gray. Not magical, just ordinary, but it carried the scent of lavender and the warmth of story. For you, he said, to keep by your bed. Ellen took it, her small fingers brushing his. She didn't speak, but her eyes sparkled. He gave the vial to her father and repeated the instructions. A single drop, at twilight, with a story. He turned to leave, but Ellen tugged on his robe. "Will you tell me one?" she asked. He paused, and then he smiled. "Yes," he said. "I believe I will." And so, in the fading light, with the scent of herbs in the air and the hush of night settling over the village, Alduin sat beside the well and told a story. A story of a dreaming owl. A story of feathers and sleep. A story of stars that whispered songs. And Ellen listened, eyes wide, heart quiet, breath slow. By the end, she was asleep in her father's arms. A few days passed, and the air in Thistledown turned cooler. Leaves on the birch trees began to fade at the edges, gold brushing green, copper trailing toward amber. The season was shifting slowly, a careful turning, as though the earth itself were beginning to slumber. Inside his cottage, Alduin prepared for the change. He moved through his apothecary, brushing dust from bottles, checking the tightly sealed jars of dried root and flour. He replaced a cracked stopper with one carved from pine, wrapped bundles of dried sage, and hung them by the hearth to keep them dry as the damp months came. The work was slow and simple, a kind of ritual in itself, like tidying up before winter dreams. The alchemist's mind wandered as he worked, often returning to the village, to the children sleeping peacefully, and the soft, ancient presence he felt more keenly with each passing dusk. He had begun to sense something else, too, something deeper. Not danger, not even mystery, but a question, floating on the edges of things. He would pause at his window sometimes and listen. Not with his ears, but with the same inner stillness Brita had taught him long ago. The silence carried a sound, like distant chimes, a call, gentle and strange. And always, there was the owl, She returned each night, sometimes perched on the yew branch, other times watching from the mossy stones behind the cottage. Her eyes glowed faintly in the candlelight. One night, Alderman stepped outside, his shawl wrapped against the chill. He stood beneath the stars, their soft silver scattered across the sky, and whispered, "Is there more you want me to see?" The owl blinked, then took flight. He watched her arc across the treetops, her wings soundless, her body nothing more than shadow against moonlight. He took it as a yes. The next morning, Alderman walked farther than usual. He followed a memory one he hadn't thought of in years. A clearing, deep in the forest, where Brita had once taken him when he was just a boy. "This place," she had whispered, "is where old stories gather, not to be told, just to rest." He had not been there since her passing. It was not marked on any map. But his feet remembered. Through the ferns and tall grass, past fallen stones and twisted vines, Alderman followed the quiet pull in his chest until he stepped into the clearing. And there it was, just as he recalled. The ground was soft with moss, silvered with morning dew. A ring of ancient oaks stood in a wide circle, their trunks gnarled and thick with age, their roots woven like fingers into the earth. In the center was a single, large stone flat-topped, half-buried, and smooth with time. He knelt beside it, brushing away leaves and petals. On the stone was a carving. Faint now, but still clear. A feather, curved and gentle. Not a bird's. Not quite. An alchemist's feather. He had forgotten this detail. Forgotten the way Brita had traced the carving with her fingertip, whispering, "Some knowledge is meant only for dreams." He sat beside the stone, legs folded, hands resting in his lap. He closed his eyes. He listened. Time passed. He didn't count it. Birds called. Leaves shifted. A wind moved through the trees like breath. And then, like smoke curling into shape, a voice stirred in his mind. Not words, exactly, but presence. A memory of a voice. A dream of Brita. "You've remembered. Good." He saw her in his mind's eye, not as she had been near the end, but as she had looked when she first found him. Wild-haired, sharp-eyed, wrapped in a patchwork robe of forest colors. She smiled. "There's something you left unfinished." "What?" Alderman asked gently, his voice barely audible. "I've been helping. The children." "Yes, but there's more. The feather you carry." He reached into his satchel and drew it out. Not the ordinary one he had given Ellen, but the silvery gray feather he had found weeks ago, the one tucked into the jar of verbena. He had kept it close, not knowing why. "It's not just a symbol," Brita's memory whispered. "It's a key." To what? To the dreaming library. Alderman blinked, heart steady, breath calm. He had heard of the dreaming library as a child. Stories passed in whispers between apprentices. A place where sleeping minds left fragments of their dreams, woven into books bound by starlight. It had always sounded like legend, but Brita had never told tales she didn't believe in. "You're ready," she said softly. "The path is not walked, but remembered. Let the feather guide you." And then the presence faded. Not suddenly, just like a candle slowly burning low. Alderman sat in silence for a long while. Then he stood, cradling the feather. The forest around him was the same, and yet different. Like waking from a dream and still carrying its weight on your skin. He returned to his cottage before sunset, hands tingling, eyes quiet. That night, he made a simple meal of root soup and barley bread, fed the hearth with cedar wood, and set a single candle in the window. He placed the feather on the table, beside his journal, and opened to a blank page. "If the dreaming library exists," he wrote, "then it is not hidden. It is remembered." He closed the book, and he waited. Alderman's dream was not like other dreams. There was no hurry, no blur of strange faces or tangled memories. Everything moved slowly, like lanterns drifting across still water. He sat in the floating chair of the dreaming library, the soft hum of silence surrounding him as the book with his name settled gently into his lap. Its cover was a dark, warm brown, worn smooth as if countless hands had touched it before. He traced the lettering on the spine. Alderwin, not Master Alderwin, not the alchemist of Thistledown, just his name. He opened it. There were pages filled with ink, but also some that shifted like mist. Others pulsed faintly, like heartbeats. The words rearranged themselves depending on where his eyes fell, sometimes a story from his youth, sometimes a memory he didn't remember living, and sometimes dreams, not his own. He turned a page and saw Ellen, curled in sleep, her fingers still holding the feather he had given her. Around her were clouds shaped like birds, trees whispering in green. A bear sat nearby, wearing a silver crown, humming a lullaby. Another page Corwin, seated on the back of a creature that looked like a winged badger, soaring through a dream sky lit with orange stars. And still another Brita, younger than he had ever known her, seated beneath a tree made entirely of candlelight. He looked up from the book. The library waited, shelves upon shelves, books glowing faintly, dreams suspended in pages. There was no dust, no clocks, just time, breathing. Alderwin stood, the book still in his arms. He stepped between shelves, drawn not by logic, but by feeling. And then he found another book. It had no title, just a feather on the cover identical to the one he had found in his jar. He touched it. The book shivered. When he opened it, a voice spoke not aloud, but through the bones of the library. Every story whispered into sleep is written here. Every soft ending, every gentle beginning. And then another voice, Brida's, woven like silk through the first added. But some stories go unwritten, until someone chooses to remember them. Alderwin awoke just before dawn. He lay still in his bed, the quilt heavy and warm around him. The fire in the hearth was long gone to ash, but a line of pale light had begun to bloom at the edge of the curtains. He did not move right away. He let the dream settle. He remembered every detail. When he finally rose, he wrapped the quilt around his shoulders and sat by the hearth, staring at the feather resting on the table. Then, without a word, he pulled his journal forward and began to write, not in his usual small, tidy script, but in soft strokes, slow and deliberate. He did not write a potion recipe. He wrote a story of the dreaming library, of a floating chair and a nameless book, of children whose dreams unfolded into stories too beautiful to forget. He wrote for hours until the light changed from gray to gold. When he stopped, his hand was sore, but his heart was quiet. Something had shifted. That day, Alderwin went to Thistledown not to deliver medicine or collect herbs, but simply to walk among the people. He passed by the baker, who handed him a small loaf with currants, warm from the oven. He paused near the schoolhouse, where the children sat on stone benches beneath the old elm, listening to stories told by the teacher's apprentice. And then, near the edge of the village, he saw something that gave him pause. A young girl, perhaps 6 years old, was drawing in the dirt with a stick. As he passed, she looked up and said, "Did you really ride the wind in your sleep?" Alderwin blinked. "I did?" The girl nodded. "My sister dreamed it. Said she saw you, riding a silver feather like a boat, over a library made of clouds." Alderwin knelt, his heart thudding, not fast, not afraid, just full. "Did she say what I was doing?" The girl nodded again. "You were catching dreams in a jar, like fireflies." Alderwin smiled. "That sounds about right." He stood, gave her a soft nod, and walked on. But inside, something new had awakened. That evening, Alderwin returned to the clearing. The stone circle waited unchanged. But this time, he didn't sit. He stood at the center, holding the silver feather in both hands, and whispered. "I remember now." The wind stirred. The trees whispered. And from the sky, a single soft sound like pages turning drifted down. The owl returned, landing on the stone beside him. She tilted her head, eyes gleaming in the moonlight. Alderwin bowed his head. "Thank you," he said. The owl blinked, and then she spoke. Not in words, not in voice, but in thought. A sound that became meaning. "There's more to be done." Back in the cottage that night, Alderwin wrote a letter. He sealed it with a wax stamp of a feather and left it on his windowsill, knowing the right eyes would find it. The letter read, "To the keepers of forgotten dreams, I am ready. Let the stories come. Let the pages open. Let sleep carry us there. Together." Alderwin, and when he blew out the candle and slipped beneath his quilt, the owl remained outside the window, watching. And the dreams came again. Not just to him, but to all who needed them. In the days that followed, Alderwin's life took on a new rhythm, quieter still, but humming with a strange kind of readiness. It was as if something ancient had cracked open inside him, something that had waited years in silence. He moved through his days much the same as before, gathering herbs, blending teas, answering gentle knocks at his door, but beneath the surface, everything had changed. Each night, just after twilight, he sat at his writing desk, the silver feather beside him. He would dip his quill, and without effort or hesitation, begin to write. The words came not from memory or imagination, but from somewhere softer, deeper, as if he were only transcribing the dreams of others. Some were short, just a single paragraph, like the echo of a forgotten lullaby. Others stretched for pages, detailing dreamscapes of glistening lakes where fish swam through the sky, or forests where the trees sang in voices made of bells. These dream stories, as he began to call them, were not inventions. He knew that now. They were real in their own way, fragments of sleep collected from villagers, travelers, and perhaps even the land itself. He bound each one by hand, not with leather, as he once might have done for a proper grimoire, but with cloth soft linen dyed with berry ink. He stitched each spine with golden thread and placed them on a new shelf he had cleared in the corner of the room, just beneath the window where the owl sat nightly. The shelf grew slowly but steadily. 6 books, then 11, then 17, and still they came. One evening, a young boy named Ivo came to his door. His cheeks were red from the wind, his boots muddy, and he carried a bundle wrapped in wool. "My grandfather can't sleep," he said. "He says he forgets his dreams before he can catch them." Alderwin looked down at the bundle and unwrapped it. Inside was a wooden toy, a carved bird with painted wings. "He used to tell me stories about birds that guarded people while they slept," the boy said, voice shy. "I thought maybe, if he had a story again, he might remember." Alderwin knelt and looked into Ivo's eyes. "You did something kind. That's a kind of magic, too." He stood, crossed the room, and selected one of the dream books from his shelf. It was wrapped in blue linen, stitched with thread the color of winter sky. "This one is about a bird," he said, placing it gently in Ivo's hands. "But it's not meant to be read with your eyes." The boy looked confused. "Tell your grandfather to hold it near his heart before sleep," Alderwin continued. "Let his breath slow. Let his hands grow still. The story will come on its own." Ivo nodded, clutched the book to his chest, and left without another word. Alderwin closed the door, heart full. That night, the owl did not come. He waited for her as always, a cup of thyme tea in his hands, his shawl wrapped about his shoulders. But the branch remained empty. The stars, however, were especially clear, sharper than usual, as if etched in silver against the dark velvet sky. And then, just as he was about to turn in, he heard a sound not in the air, but within the very walls of the cottage. A slow, rhythmic whisper, like the turning of pages. He stood, followed the sound to his shelf. The books were glowing. Not all of them, just 2. One glowed a soft green, the other pale lavender. He reached for the green one and opened it. Inside was a dream he had not written. Not with ink. The pages were blank to the eye, but when he held them in the firelight, shapes began to appear, shadows of trees, the outline of a sleeping fox, a gentle stream that shimmered across the parchment. The dream played out as though the paper itself remembered. When he closed the book, he felt his breath deepen, his pulse slow. The air in the cottage had changed. It was thicker, filled with something like intention. The library, he thought. It's reaching out. The following day, Alduin visited the village with no particular errand. He wandered, listened, not just to words, but to pauses, silences, the space between sentences. In the weaving house, an elderly woman sat beside her loom, humming softly. Her rhythm was slow, but her eyes were bright. Alduin sat beside her for a while. "Did you sleep well last night?" he asked gently. She nodded. For the first time in many years. "Did you dream?" She paused her weaving. Her eyes lifted toward the rafters, as if she could still see the shape of her sleep hovering there. "I dreamed I was a girl again," she said, "running through a golden field. My sisters were laughing ahead of me. We wore crowns made of broomflower. I haven't thought of that day in over 50 years. Alduin said nothing. He simply smiled and took her hand, then left a feather beside her basket and walked on. By the time the first frost of autumn kissed the ground, Alduin's shelf held 23 books, each one stitched with care, each one gathered not from his own mind, but from the dreams of those around him. He had become, without ceremony, the dreamkeeper, not a title he chose, but one the village had begun to whisper gently, gratefully. And though he wore no badge, no cloak of station or crown of leaves, he bore the mantle as gently as the feather that started it all. He had no apprentices, no tower, no wand or sigil, only a feather, a shelf, and a heart still quiet enough to listen. Winter came not with a howl, but with a whisper. The first snow arrived silently one morning, dusting the thatched roofs of thistledown in sugar-like white. Icicles formed along the corners of Alduin's window panes, catching the sunrise in pale blue glimmers. The forest slowed to a hush. Footsteps became muffled. The trees held their breath. Inside his cottage, Alduin added new logs to the hearth and wrapped a fur-lined shawl around his shoulders. He stirred a pot of warm root stew, its scent thick with parsnip and rosemary. A kettle whistled gently nearby, promising tea and stillness. But his mind was far from quiet. In the nights leading up to the snow, the dreams had changed. They were longer, stranger, more vivid. Sometimes they came without warning while he chopped herbs, or folded linens, or simply watched the snowflakes fall. Visions would slip in, like wind through a cracked window. A forest lit only by floating lanterns. A child sleeping inside the shell of a giant snail. A tree with golden fruit that whispered people's names as it bloomed. He no longer questioned where they came from. The dreaming library was speaking more clearly now, and he was learning how to listen. One evening, as the snow fell gently and the village huddled close around its hearths, a knock came at Alduin's door. When he opened it, he found not a villager, but a stranger. A tall woman, wrapped in a blue traveling cloak dusted with frost. Her eyes were the color of melted slate, her voice low and calm. "You are Alduin?" she asked. "I am," he answered. "They said you keep dreams." Alduin nodded and stepped aside. She entered quietly, bringing the crisp scent of the road with her. She removed her gloves and sat by the fire without waiting to be asked. "I've come from Westmere," she said. 5 days' journey. Alduin poured 2 cups of tea, sliding one toward her across the wooden table. "Why?" he asked. She took a breath. "My daughter doesn't sleep. Hasn't in months. She grows weaker each week. We've tried doctors, charms, prayers, nothing." She reached into her cloak and withdrew a tiny bundle wrapped in wool. She opened it slowly, revealing a lock of hair tied with lavender thread. and a small stone painted with the child's name, Leora. Alderwin reached across the table, his palm open. The woman placed the items in his hand. "You don't want a potion," Alderwin said gently. "You want a story?" She said nothing, but she didn't deny it. That night, Alderwin sat in complete silence. No candles, no ink, no books. Just him, the feather, and the stillness of snowfall against the window. He held the lock of Leora's hair between his fingers, closed his eyes, and let himself drift. He found the girl's dream easily. It was faint, barely a flicker, like a candle left too long in the wind. But it was there, a field of tall blue grass, a house in the distance made of shells, and a figure small, childlike, curled in the shadow of a silver tree. She was not lost, just forgotten, and she was waiting. He reached for her, not with his hands, but with his breath, and whispered, "You are not alone." He awoke with ink stains on his fingertips and a full book on the desk before him, bound in soft sky blue with stars embroidered in the thread. He wrapped it carefully, placed it in the satchel beside a feather, and left before sunrise. The woman from Westmere was still sleeping on the cot beside the hearth. He did not wake her, but he placed the bundle gently on the table beside her, along with a note. "Read this near her. Do not speak. Do not explain. Let the story do the rest." When she awoke, she was alone again, but something in the air felt softer, like memory, like the hush before a lullaby. 3 days later, a second letter arrived tied to the leg of a gray dove. Inside was a single line, "She sleeps." Word began to spread, slow and soft like falling snow, not just in Thistledown, but beyond. Travelers arrived, 1 or 2 each week. A tired herbalist from the northern coast, a shepherd boy whose dreams had turned to sand, a mother who had lost her son's laughter to silence. Alderwin never turned anyone away. He didn't promise answers. He didn't promise healing, but he listened. And when the story came, he gave it freely stitched in linen, threaded with care, sealed with a single feather tucked inside. Some came back with tears. Some sent letters years later. Some never returned, but all left lighter. Then, one night, as a storm thundered far away in the hills, something new arrived, not a dream, but a memory. Alderwin was walking through the forest in his mind. Not the real forest, but a place made of half-remembered paths and moonlit moss. He came to the clearing with the stone circle again, but this time, it was not empty. A tall figure stood in the center, cloaked in deep green. The figure turned, and it was Brita, but older than he remembered, and smiling. "You've nearly filled a shelf," she said. He nodded. "I thought the dreaming library was just stories." "It is," she said, "and stories are everything." He looked down. In his hands, a book he had never written. The cover was blank. The pages were glowing faintly. "What is this one?" he asked. Brita tilted her head. "That one is yours." And as he opened it, he awoke. The morning after his dream of Brita and the glowing book, Alderwin awoke with the distinct feeling that something within him had changed. It was not a loud feeling. It did not demand attention. It was more like the soft awareness of sunlight filtering through your eyelids, or the hush of snowfall pressing against the windows present, but patient. He moved slowly through his usual rituals, steeping herbs, kindling the fire, and brushing dew from the window ledge where the owl usually perched. But even as he warmed his hands by the hearth, his thoughts stayed fixed on the blank book from his vision. It had felt so real, the weight of it, the warmth of the pages, the quiet invitation to begin writing, not for others, not for the village, not for the children or their dreams, but for himself. Alderwin, the dreamkeeper. Alderwin, the silent scribe of sleep. And yet, until now, he had never truly recorded his dream, the one that had followed him since childhood. The dream that had first drawn Brita to his side when he was only 7, wide-eyed and sleepless. That evening, after the village lamps were dark and the stars blinked low in the sky, Alderman lit a single beeswax candle and sat at his desk. He pulled a fresh sheaf of parchment from the cupboard. The feather lay before him silent, silver, still. He did not dip it in ink. He only held it between his fingers and breathed. And then, without thinking, he began. He wrote of a cave beneath the sea, where water dripped in rhythm like a heartbeat. He wrote of a child seated on a rock, hands folded, waiting. Of a mother who had turned into starlight before the child could speak her name. Of an endless night where dreams floated like fireflies trapped beneath the waves, flickering faintly, always just beyond reach. The child was him. He knew that now. The cave, the waiting, the longing for something unseen. It had never been just a dream. It was a memory of grief, of silence, of stories unspoken. The candle burned low, the words flowed. The page became a mirror. By morning, Alderman had written 63 pages. They were not neat, they were not polished, but they were true. He bound them in soft charcoal cloth and stitched the spine in thread the color of the ocean before a storm. He tucked the book not on the dream shelf, but beneath his pillow. It belonged to no one but him. That night, he slept without dreams. And it was enough. The days began to stretch toward spring. Thistledown thawed gently, the snow receding like tide from the banks of the old road. Children returned to the fields, chasing one another beneath budding trees. The village breathed easier. But with the warming earth came new visitors. 2 sisters from the western marshes, their hands calloused from fishing nets, arrived seeking a dream for their aging father, who had forgotten the sound of birdsong. A merchant from across the mountains came with coins. He insisted on offering in exchange for a book that could ease his wife as nightly terrors. Alderman refused the payment, of course. Dreams could not be bought. Instead, he gave the merchant a dream sewn into golden linen, its pages filled with lullabies once hummed by shepherds, long ago forgotten. He asked only that the merchant speak his wife's name aloud before placing the book beside her pillow. She slept that night, and in the morning she wept with quiet joy. One morning, as Alderman sat sipping tea, he received a visit unlike any other. A child no older than 6 stood at his doorstep, alone, holding a feather in both hands. "I dreamed of this," she said calmly, "and I think it's for you." Alderman knelt, took the feather gently. It was unlike any he had seen, long, silvery blue, almost translucent, with an iridescent shimmer that shifted in the light. "Where did you find this?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "I didn't find it. I remembered it." Alderman smiled, a chill running down his arms. The child looked past him, into the cottage. "This is where the dreams come from, isn't it?" He nodded. "It's one place. Yes." She handed him the feather. "Then this dream is ready now. It wants to be written." And just like that, she turned and walked back toward the village, bare feet silent on the morning grass. Alderman placed the feather on his writing table. It glowed faintly, pulsing in time with his breath. When he touched it, a feeling swept over him, like standing beneath a waterfall of moonlight, like being cradled in the memory of a lullaby you heard once long ago and somehow still remembered. He did not write right away. He waited, listened, and slowly the dream unfolded, not in words, but in warmth. The days began to take on a rhythm as natural as breath. Morning light through frosted panes, kettle steaming on the hob, gentle footfalls in fresh snow, fading into soil as the earth softened. And each evening the feather would pulse with a gentle glow, inviting Alderman to sit and listen again. The glowing feather the child had brought him still rested on the desk. He hadn't yet written its dream, not because he couldn't, but because it felt sacred. This dream was different, older. It asked for patience, for silence. So, he tended to it in small ways. He laid a cloth over it each night, lit a candle near it at dusk, whispered to it as if it were a sleeping thing, not trying to wake it, only to remind it that he was there. In the meantime, new dreams arrived like drifting seeds on spring wind. He wrote of a ship made of petals, drifting across a sea of milk, of a woman who could only fall asleep while listening to the sound of snowfall on glass, of a boy whose dreams were written into the bark of an ancient tree, his every memory preserved in rings only visible beneath moonlight. With each story, his understanding deepened. He began to see how dreams lived in everything, in the curve of a wooden spoon, the warmth of a fresh loaf, the silent nod of a stranger passing on the road. Dreams were not separate from waking life. They were braided through it, like golden threads stitched through a gray cloak, subtle, shimmering, always present if one knew where to look. One afternoon, as Alderwin walked the outer path of the village, he noticed something curious. Several children were sitting in a circle beside the riverbank, eyes closed, holding hands. At first, he thought they were playing a game, but when he listened more closely, he realized they were humming, not a tune exactly, but a vibration soft and low, as if trying to feel the sound instead of hear it. He approached gently, and the smallest girl opened one eye. "We're dreaming awake," she said, matter-of-factly. Alderwin knelt beside them. "Who taught you that?" She shrugged. "No one. We just started doing it." He smiled. "Does it work?" The oldest boy nodded. "It's not like sleep dreams. It's like remembering something that hasn't happened yet." Alderwin sat with them, hummed softly, and for a moment, just a breath, he felt it too, a dream blooming inside the daylight. That evening, back in his cottage, he sat before the silver-blue feather once more. He lit no candles this time, made no tea. He simply sat and closed his eyes. When the vision came, it was unlike anything he had experienced before. He was floating not through sky or sea, but through memory itself, like drifting down a ribbon of moments, unspooling in soft, golden light. He saw Brita again, not as a dream, but as she had once been, younger, laughing, teaching him to whisper to sleeping plants, to listen to the earth sigh before spring, to believe that silence held more wisdom than speech. He saw his own childhood, the cold winters, the quiet ache of being different, the way he had longed for something he couldn't name, a story, perhaps, or a place where stories lived. And then he saw something entirely new, a great tree, taller than any tower, standing at the heart of a luminous forest. Its bark shimmered like pearl, and its leaves were shaped like feathers, thousands of them, shifting softly in a breeze that made no sound. At its base, a book, bound in woven threads of silver light. He reached for it, and as his fingers touched the cover, the vision dissolved. He was back in his cottage, but the feather on the desk was gone. In its place, a book. It was bound in deep blue cloth, embroidered with constellations he didn't recognize. The stitching shimmered in the firelight. The book had no title, but Alderwin knew it was the dream, the one the feather had been carrying, the one he had been waiting for. He opened it and read. The words were unlike his own. They weren't penned in ink, but in feeling, as if each sentence had been formed by breath and moonlight and memory combined. The story told of a place called Vellerin Hollow, a village not unlike Thistledown, but hidden within the folds of time. In Vellerin, people were born with fragments of dreams in their palms. These fragments glowed faintly and guided them through life. Some used their fragments to build music. Others used them to shape glass that held emotions. A few, the rarest, used their fragments to write books no one could read, but everyone could feel. One child in Vellerin, the story said, had no fragment. They were born quiet, unnoticed. But over time, the child began to collect the fragments of others, gathering forgotten dreams like fallen leaves, piecing them together into something new. A dream made not of one life, but of many. That child's name? Alderwin. The book trembled in his hands. He felt it deep within his chest, something old stirring awake. This was not fiction. This was his beginning, not as an alchemist, not as a dreamkeeper, but as a child who listened, who gathered, who remembered what others forgot, and gave it back in the form of dreams. Outside, the wind rose softly, curling around the stones of the cottage. The fire hummed low. The sky darkened into a soft navy, and the first stars blinked into place like ancient eyes watching kindly from above. He held the book to his chest, and for the first time in many years, Alderwin wept, not from sorrow, but from peace. The days that followed passed in a kind of golden quiet. Alderwin felt no urgency, no rush. It was as though the world had exhaled with him, releasing some long-held breath. He walked slower, now noticing the tiny things, the shimmer of morning dew on the cobwebs outside his window, the way a robin's song echoed twice through the trees before fading, the way steam curled upward from his teacup like a story not yet told. The villagers began to dream more deeply, not all at once, but gradually, like snow melting into the soil. Alderwin could see it in their eyes, calmer, softer. The weight they carried seemed to shift, just a little, and in its place came wonder. Children brought drawings of the dreams they'd had, castles built on clouds, dragons made of wind, rivers where you could whisper your fears and they would float away. He hung each drawing by the hearth, letting their colors fill the room with quiet magic. And though he still wrote, Alderwin now spent more time listening than ever before. He listened to wind in branches, to boots on thawing earth, to silence between words. The dreaming library, he realized, was not a place. It was not bound by walls or shelves or stitched covers. It was here, in the hush before someone fell asleep. In the way, a tired parent held their child's hand a little longer. In the space between heartbeats, where the world paused just long enough to allow dreaming. One morning, as the mist still clung to the treetops, Alderwin heard the soft rustle of wings just outside his cottage. He opened the door and found the owl, not the one from months ago, but a new one, smaller, with bright violet eyes. It blinked at him slowly, then dropped a scroll at his feet. Alderwin bent to pick it up, unfolding the parchment with care. Inside was a map, but not one of roads or rivers. It was a map of dreams. The paper shimmered faintly, showing no cities, no borders, only clusters of light, threads of silver winding through invisible terrain. There were pulses of blue where sorrow dwelled, soft pinks where joy lingered, and deep emerald where silence held power. In the center, a point of golden light flickered steadily. Alderwin's cottage. He traced a path leading away from it, winding deep into a forest he did not recognize. And in one corner of the map, in the tiniest of script, were the words, "The library awaits." That night, Alderwin packed lightly. He did not know if he would return. He tucked the silver feather into the inside pocket of his cloak, gathered a pouch of dried tea leaves, a blanket, a warm loaf wrapped in cloth, and a single candle. The dream books he left behind all but one. The one Brita had said was his. He tied it with ribbon and slipped it into his satchel. Before he left, he placed a note on the hearthstone. For the next dreamkeeper, listen well. Begin with silence. Then he stepped out into the night. The forest was no longer the same. Or perhaps he was not the same. The path beneath his boots felt familiar and unknown all at once. Trees leaned in gently, as if recognizing him. The wind carried the scent of old parchment and lavender. He walked without lantern, letting the moon guide him. The deeper he walked, the softer the world became. Sounds muffled. Footsteps slowed. Time loosened its grip. Eventually, the path led to a clearing he did not recall, though it felt like somewhere he'd always known. In the center stood an archway made not of stone or wood, but of woven feathers, moss, and twine. It shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Beyond it, only mist. He stepped through. There was no sensation of moving, no rush of wind or shift in ground. But when the mist cleared, Alderwin stood beneath trees that pulsed with gentle light. Leaves like glass caught and held memories in their reflections. A stream ran silently nearby, its waters flowing not in one direction, but all directions at once. And in the center of this dreamwood stood a tower, not tall or imposing, but round and kind, made of pale wood and silver vines. This was the dreaming library. Not a building, but a being. Alive, breathing, waiting. He approached slowly. A doorway opened without sound. Inside, the walls were made not of stone, but of books stacked on shelves formed from tree limbs and star thread. Some books glowed softly, others pulsed like sleeping hearts. And the air was filled with the scent of sleep and memory. Alderwin stepped inside, and the door behind him closed like a whisper. There was no one waiting, no keeper, no guide. Only a table at the center of the round room, with a single book resting atop it. He approached, opened it. Inside, the first page was blank. But as he held his hand above it, a line of text appeared, forming in golden light. All dreams remembered are doors. He turned the page. More words bloomed into view. Some must be gathered, others must be given. Yours was always both. The next page held no words, only an image. A field of blue grass beneath a sky stitched with stars. A boy seated cross-legged at the base of a feathered tree, smiling, waiting, and Alderwin wept again, because he remembered. He remembered everything. Alderwin did not know how long he stood there in the silence of the dreaming library. Time no longer moved in hours or minutes. It moved in memory, in heartbeat, in breath. The air was still and warm like the space beneath a blanket on a winter morning, the kind of warmth that made you forget the world beyond your bed. He traced his fingers along the cover of the glowing book and let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. He turned another page and then another. Each one brought forth something different. Not always words, sometimes shapes or textures. Sometimes scents that filled the room for only a moment before fading. A sea breeze laced with salt and rosemary. The earthy scent of parchment dried in sunlight. Lavender petals pressed between forgotten pages. As he flipped each page, the room seemed to lean in, as if listening to the story unfolding. Then came a page that glowed brighter than the rest. The moment he laid eyes on it, Alderwin knew this was not just a memory. It was an invitation. The illustration upon it was unlike the others. A path, winding upward through a forest where the trees were taller than any he had seen in the waking world. Their branches stretched into the sky and disappeared in the constellations. The stars looked close enough to touch, and nestled within their light were symbols runes he did not recognize but somehow understood. He blinked, and the path on the page shimmered. When he opened his eyes again, he was no longer in the library. He stood at the foot of the path. He had been drawn into the dream. The forest was silver, not with snow, but with a light that came from nowhere and everywhere. Every leaf shimmered as though dipped in moonlight. The ground beneath his feet was soft and warm, like moss that had waited centuries to be stepped on. There was no wind, yet the branches swayed as though breathing. He walked slowly. Each step made no sound. The deeper into the forest he went, the more the world around him seemed to remember him. A lantern glowed softly atop a rock, though there was no flame inside. It simply shone with a soft inner warmth. A ribbon hung from a tree branch, and when Alderwin touched it, it whispered in a voice like bright as laughter. At the next bend, a small wooden flute rested on a stump. When he picked it up and breathed across it, it played a melody he had never learned, but somehow knew. This was no ordinary dream. This was the dreaming of the dream itself. A place where all forgotten things waited to be remembered. Where every child's wish and every elder's final thought shimmered and swirled in the air like dust in sunlight. Here, Alderwin was not a visitor. He was a part of it. He followed the path until it ended at a clearing. In the center stood a single tree, the tree of feathers. It was exactly as he had seen it in his vision towering, radiant, each leaf shaped like a feather, every one glowing with its own memory. Beneath its roots flowed a quiet stream, and beside it, a bookstand carved of pale stone. On the stand rested a book with no title. He approached, knowing without knowing what it was. This was the final dream, the dream that would become the next dreamkeeper's guide. He opened the book and, as he did, felt a gentle pull not away, but within, as though the pages had become mirrors, and the mirror had become a doorway. Images flickered across them. A girl sleeping in a field of bluebells. A grandmother humming a lullaby in a tongue long forgotten. A feather floating across an endless ocean, carrying the hope of someone too tired to speak it aloud. And then, his own face. Younger, brighter, laughing. He touched the page gently. It rippled beneath his fingers like water. And in that moment, he understood. He was not the first dreamkeeper, and he would not be the last. He was a thread, one line in the long, quiet song of the world's remembering. He closed the book, and as he did, the tree of feathers rustled, its leaves rising gently in a breeze he could not feel. They shimmered and spun slowly, then drifted downward like snow. One by one, the feathers came to rest around him, blanketing the clearing in soft, silent light. He lay down beneath the tree on a bed of feathers and dreams, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Thank you." The stars above blinked once, then twice, and the forest exhaled. Far away, in the waking world, the fire in Alderwin's cottage dimmed to embers. But on the table near the window, a new feather had appeared silver blue, softly glowing, and beside it, a note written in fine, shimmering script. For the next dreamkeeper. Begin with silence. Then, begin to listen. The feather rested there quietly, as if it had always belonged in the little cottage. No flash, no flourish, just presence. Calm and steady, it pulsed like the rhythm of a resting heart. The note beside it remained undisturbed, the edges slightly curled by the warmth of the fire that now slept low in the hearth. The house itself had become a kind of dream-still content and filled with a hush that seemed to stretch through time. Outside, the village of Thistledown went on. Children laughed in the meadows. Neighbors exchanged warm loaves of bread and pouches of herbs. Birds stitched songs into the morning air, and the bees began their slow, golden work. Few noticed the gentle change in the wind, the way it now carried something softer, something listening. Fewer still noticed the figure that appeared one morning at the cottage door, a girl no older than 10, with eyes like deep riverstone and a braid that fell down her back like a dark ribbon. She stood for a while before the door, not knocking, just listening. And then she stepped inside, as if drawn by something older than invitation. The room felt warm and weightless, the kind of space that cradled the quiet. The candle on the writing table flickered softly, unburned. The feather waited, its glow deepening the longer she stood before it. She did not rush to touch it. Instead, she sat on the small wooden stool by the window and closed her eyes. She breathed. One breath. 2. Then 3. And the feather pulsed in time with her own slow rhythm. In that moment, the girl understood what the note meant. Begin with silence. Then, begin to listen. It wasn't a riddle. It was a remembering. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of stories that hadn't yet been written, full of dreams waiting to be shaped. She reached out and touched the feather gently. A flicker passed through her fingertips, not warmth, not cold, just knowing. In the drawer beneath the table was parchment. ink and a book with empty pages bound in soft moss-colored leather. She did not question how she knew these things. The cottage was not asking her to be someone she wasn't. It was simply asking her to be still, to be ready. And so she began. Not with grand tales, not with heroes or quests. She began with a single sentence. The moon once whispered to a sleeping well. The ink dried before she'd even lifted the pen. And the feather pulsed again, stronger this time, as if in approval. That night, she stayed in the cottage, slept beneath the same ceiling Alderaan once dreamed beneath. She lit no candle, only curled beneath a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender and ash. And as she drifted into sleep, the room seemed to hum not loud, just beneath the edge of hearing, like a lullaby remembered from long ago. In her dreams, she walked beside a silver stream where books floated like lily on the surface. She reached for one, and when she opened it, she saw her own handwriting. The story she had not yet written, already blooming on the page. She smiled in her sleep, and the house smiled with her. Outside, the wind carried the sound of soft turning pages to the edges of the village. Thistledown was quiet again, but something had begun. Something old. Something new. The dreaming had passed on, not ended, only shifted hands. From Alderaan to her, the next dreamkeeper. She would listen. She would wait. She would write. Morning light spilled gently into the cottage, filtered through the old lace curtain that Alderaan had once mended by hand. The girl stirred slowly beneath her wool blanket, the smell of sleep and lavender still curling in the air like a lullaby left unfinished. She opened her eyes not with urgency, but with the quiet sense that something meaningful awaited her, not loud or dramatic. The present, like dew on grass, like ink just beginning to dry. The feather still rested on the writing table, its silver blue shimmer dimmed by daylight, but no less alive. She stepped toward it barefoot, the wood floor cool and creaking softly beneath her. She sat down, stretched her fingers across the page she had begun, and read the single line she had written the night before. The moon once whispered to a sleeping well. It felt even truer now in the daylight, like something ancient that had only been waiting for her to remember it. She reached for the quill again and began to write, not fast, not slow, just steady. Her hand moved as if guided by something just beyond sight. She didn't think about what came next. She only listened. Listened to the stillness, to the warmth of the light, to the invisible hush in the space between her breath and the feather's faint pulse. Each word came as if it had always been there. The story unfolding was not hers, and yet it belonged to her in every way. By midday, she paused. Her stomach reminded her that she was not made entirely of dreams. She found bread and cheese in the larder, dried fruit in a small pouch near the window. She ate slowly by the hearth, looking out toward the garden where pale crocuses had begun to bloom, even though no one had planted them. A robin hopped across the sill, looked in, and then flew away content, as if it too understood that this place was in good hands. Later, she stepped outside and followed the path down toward the river. The village was waking in its own slow way. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys. Wool was stretched across lines to dry. The blacksmith's hammer echoed gently through the trees, not loud, but purposeful. She passed the same children who had once hummed beside the riverbank. They smiled at her, as if they recognized something in her they couldn't quite name. One of them handed her a small stone carved with a feather. "We saved this," the child said softly, "in case someone like you came back." She kept it in her pocket. When she returned to the cottage that evening, the feather was glowing more brightly. Not urgent, just ready. She knew the time had come to write her first true dream gift, not one for herself, but for someone else. She sat quietly, thought for a moment, then remembered the old woman in the village square, the one who fed sparrows and always stared, just a little too long at the clouds. She had once said, "My dreams left with my husband." That had stayed with the girl. She dipped a quill into the ink and began. She wrote of a woman walking barefoot across the surface of a still lake, of the water holding her, of her husband waiting on the other shore, smiling, not gone, just changed, of wind wrapping around them like a memory and singing a song made from all the words they never had time to say. When the last words settled into place, the ink shimmered and the feather pulsed once, then slowly dimmed. She closed the book, and when she stepped outside, she found the old woman waiting by the gate. How she had known to come, the girl did not ask. She simply handed her the small moss-bound book and said, "This one is for you." The old woman held it gently, like holding a long-lost letter. She did not speak. She only nodded once and left. That night, the girl slept deeply, and in her dreams, the stars opened into doorways, and every tree in the village hummed the same soft note. She dreamed of Alderwin again, sitting by a stream in the dreamwood, nodding gently as if to say, "Yes, this is how it begins." The next morning, the village felt quieter in a different way, more still, more seen, as if it too were listening now. The girl awoke slowly, wrapped in a quiet so deep it felt like velvet. Outside, the light had shifted. It was no longer the crisp silver light of early spring. It was golden, now soft, warm, the kind of glow that made everything feel like it had always been loved. She lay in bed for a long while, listening. The birds sang slower this morning. The wind moved through the trees in long, gentle breaths. Even the old wooden beams of the cottage creaked in a language she was beginning to understand. When she rose, the cottage welcomed her like a living thing. The floorboards greeted her footsteps with soft sighs. The walls held stories in their grain. She could almost feel Alderwin's presence, not as a ghost, not as a shadow, but as something woven into the very space itself. She found herself humming as she poured tea, her voice barely more than a whisper, blending into the stillness like thread into fabric. She sat once more at the writing table. The feather, now glowing with the faintest edge of gold, lay patiently beside the inkpot. She opened a fresh page in her dream book, took a breath, and listened. And what she heard was joy, not loud, not sudden, just the quiet joy of someone finding their place in the world. It spilled into her hands, into her quill, into the ink, and from there into words. She wrote of a garden where every flower bloomed in the shape of a name once spoken with love, of a well that whispered kindness to those who leaned too close, of a mountain path that only appeared when someone truly believed they deserved to reach the top. Her stories were not grand, not loud. They didn't need to be. They were gentle, soothing, dreamlike, and yet they changed things. Little by little, the villagers began to change too. One left a painted stone on the doorstep of every home. Another began baking loaves shaped like feathers. An old man who hadn't spoken in weeks began humming a lullaby no one remembered teaching him. No one said it was her. No one had to. Dreams don't need applause. They only need to be remembered. On the seventh night, she lit a candle at the hearth and opened the window to the stars. The sky yawned above her, full and glowing, the moon resting low and round as if it too were dreaming. She sat cross-legged on the floor and read the very first story she'd ever written aloud to no one and to everything. As she read, the candle flame danced slowly, then bent toward the open feather resting nearby. A windless breeze moved through the room. The pages of her dream book lifted, one by one, turning as if by unseen fingers, until the entire room was filled with the soft sound of turning pages. She closed her eyes and listened. She was not afraid. She felt her breath, slow and even. Felt the world lean in to listen with her. And then she heard it. The sound she had been waiting for. A voice not spoken aloud, but heard deep in her chest. Gentle, low, and timeless. You are not the end of this story, little one. You are its beginning again. And she smiled, because she had known all along. She was not keeping dreams. She was planting them. And dream by dream, the world would bloom. So now, dear dreamer, let your eyes grow heavy. The tale has been told, like a feather drifting through time, circling down through starlit branches, through pages unwritten, through breaths unspoken. You've walked beside aldermen on frost-warmed paths, seen bright as garden bloom beneath the hush of memory, followed a map that led not through land, but through longing. You've stepped into a forest where dreams are stitched into leaves. You've entered the library not through doors, but through silence. You've watched as a silver feather passed gently from hand to hand, not as a gift, not as a burden, but as a calling. And now, the story curls soft and warm around you like a blanket at dusk. There is no need to chase the next chapter. There is no page to turn. Only breath. Only stillness. Only the weightless feeling of drifting down, deeper and deeper, into that quiet place where the world no longer asks, but simply holds you. Can you feel it? The way your limbs soften, the way the air around you slows. Like ink settling into paper, like snow falling into snow. There is a feather above you, now soft, silver blue, glowing faintly in the dark behind your eyes. It hovers gently, a whisper in shape. It does not rush. It waits, just like you, in this stillness. If you listen very closely, you might hear the stories it carries. One about a boy who dreamed so deeply, his dreams became a doorway. One about a village where silence healed what words could not. One about you. Yes, you. Because every listener becomes a keeper. Every heartbeat holds a library. And even now, as your breath drifts soft and even as your body sinks deeper into the quiet, the feather gently touches down on your chest. Not to weigh you down, but to let you rise within, into your own dream, into your own story. There is nothing more you need to do, no journey to make. You are already where you are meant to be, floating now, weightless, wrapped in soft pages and starlight and the hush of everything being just as it should be. Sleep now, dear one. Sleep, and let the feather carry you home.